Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode. I'm thrilled, as always, that you are tuning in today. Today, we're going to be talking about a harsh inner critic. Now, raise your hand if you have a harsh inner critic, a voice that talks to you that can interrupt you out of nowhere and turn something into something you ought to be doing better. This pops up in so many places because we have been socialized to be good girls, to be pleasing everyone else, to meeting everyone's expectations. And this comes from years and years and years of training. For many of us, this part started before we were in medical school, probably before we were in college, probably when we were quite young. These parts of us that knew they needed to do better. There's a lot of talk in social science about how millennials grew up in particular with this idea of self esteem. And I'm not a social psychologist. I am not someone who is deeply immersed in this, but the theory goes that raising children with self esteem taught them that in order to be successful, in order to win, in order to be good enough, they had to accomplish, they had to achieve. And I think that's true for so many of us growing up, having been complimented and praised for the things that we've done. There's nothing wrong inherently with that, but so many of us internalize that we are worthy of praise only when we do things, and particularly only when we do things well, right, perfectly, best. I think you know what I'm talking about here. And at this point in my life, so I'm an ancient millennial. I'm the oldest kind of millennial, having been born in January of 1981. I think that's the turning point time. Very much, I grew up believing that I needed to get good grades, make everyone else happy, right? Oh gosh, I'm thinking about those reflections contests. I don't think that was just limited to our state, but there was the annual reflections contest that you did in elementary school where you submitted a poem or a piece of art or something that you had created, right? Trying to win first prize that was judged by your local PTA, right? Usually judged by the local group of school involved moms, right? Did you do something to win first place? This goes back a long way. And naturally, when we grow up in an environment when we're praised for the things that we do, so many of us start internalizing the critic, internalizing the criticism in such a way to drive us to continue to do better. So, this is the voice that tells you you're lazy if you are resting after a long day when maybe there's chores around the house that need to be done. There's laundry. You could be exercising, but you're taking the time to rest. This is the voice that wants to turn every hobby into a measurable achievement. You're not just going to go for a run because you enjoy going for a run. You're going to go for a run because you're training for a half marathon, right? We have to turn it into something that we can be lauded for. When we think about our progress into medical school, into college, right? So many of the same things apply, right? We needed to do well. We needed to look a certain way. We needed to achieve, to accomplish, to make other people happy. We might have encountered really strict external voices. Think if you had a coach or a teacher or a professor or an instructor or an attending who was very harsh, right? Who yelled at you, who referred to you by your last name, yelled at you, this is not good enough. You need to straighten up. You need to do better. Many of us have encountered these voices as well. And over again, years have internalized to various degrees this harsh inner critic so that no longer do we need to be yelled at by somebody else. We could be yelling at ourselves. I would argue that many high achievers experience this. This can, of course, cause various degrees of trauma and questions of internal safety when we try and stop listening to the voice. There are lots and lots of problems with having a harsh inner critic, and especially if you are completely driven by your harsh inner critic who doesn't let you rest, play, enjoy yourself. Everything has to be a task, a chore, an achievement. So, I want to talk about some ways that we can start to make a change. And the first thing that I want to touch on comes out of a few different disciplines, if you will. So, internal family systems is used it's a type of therapy, basically, and has its origins actually in binge eating disorder and people who describe a part of them that takes over and feels like it can't be stopped. So, Richard Schwartz I believe he's a PhD psychologist, and he noticed in working with his clients who experience binge eating disorder that they would often talk about this other part of them that seemed to take over and, desired to compulsively eat, especially to numb difficult emotions. But so many of them mentioned this that it led him down this pathway to identifying different parts of us that can take over. And of course, this is a whole stream of therapy. I'm not going to go into all of it. There are other thinkers who have created similar sort of ideas. Comes to mind Shirzad. I'm blanking on his last name, but he has a wonderful book called Positive Intelligence, and he also talks about the judge, the inner critic. So just to say, this is a fairly universal idea, but we can have a part of us that is this strong internal critic who is constantly commenting on what we are doing or not doing, trying to create a certain outcome, right? Trying to create in their mind excellence. And when this part of us is speaking to us, they are often speaking to us in harsh language, telling us we're not good enough, that we need to be doing better, that we shouldn't feel tired, we should be excited to be doing the work that we're doing. And, if we were really committed, we would just keep going, right? All sorts of really damaging messages, especially to a group of people who is already working too hard. That's my stance, is that I think as physicians, especially right now, I think many of us are overworking, which of course we have talked about before. But if we can start to identify that there is a part of us that is our inner critic, that is just a part of us, and give that person a name, give that part of us a name. You could give it a person's name. You could label it the judge, the critic, the boss. You could label it whatever you want, but recognizing that voice when it shows up, that is part of the work of trying to get out from under that part's thumb. So let's give it a name. As I was thinking about what I would be talking about today, of course, the name Karen popped up. Karen has unfortunately been co-opted as, referencing an angry, typically sort of racist white woman who's complaining about something. Maybe we don't use the name Karen. Poor Karens. I'm sorry that happened, but that's a different story. I didn't come up with that, obviously. But give it a name. Give that voice a name so that you can start to recognize it when it shows up and start to understand that that voice is not you. That voice is a part of you. Now, the next step is to ask yourself, what is it that this part of us, let's say we're calling it the judge, what is she trying to help with? What does that part of us believe is necessary in order to have success, or, I don't know, a worthiness or a good enough life? Let's really think about what that part of us is trying to help us with, because we can get angry that that part exists, but that doesn't really help us. We can hope that that part of us never pops up, but that's not how our brains work. So we're taking a different tactic here. We're trying to understand. Now, many of us believe that this harsh inner critic, this judge, is necessary in order for us to succeed. We can look back at the accomplishments that we've had and say, yeah, but if I didn't have this harsh inner critic, if I wasn't driven in this way, I would not be successful. I would not be here. I would not be working as a physician. I would not have, achieved partnership in the practice. I would not have XYZ, right? Fill in the blank. There may be parts of that that's true. And what that tells me is that your lived experience has been that in order to do the hard work that you've done, you've often listened to that inner voice, and believing that that voice is necessary in order for you to continue to do excellent work has led you with the belief, right, that that is the only way to accomplish the things that you've accomplished. And just like with anything else, of course, you're allowed to continue to think and believe that. It's totally up to you. But I think for most of us would like to become unburied from the belief that working harder and cranking ourselves as hard as is humanly possible is the only way we're going to be successful. That is not helpful if we are trying to dial down burnout, if we are trying to get out from overwhelm, right? If we are trying to feel better. Believing that you have to keep yelling at yourself in order to get anything done is so negative. It's so harsh. It's not useful. It's harming us. So let's unpack though, and instead of blaming that inner critic, let's start to understand, what does she believe is necessary in order for you to be successful? If we can start to look at her from this lens, right, and believe that this part of us believes that she has to keep yelling at us in order for us to be successful, in order for us to accomplish things, okay, well, we can take a break. Now, we don't have to believe her thought, but just acknowledging that she thinks that she's trying to help. People might have grown up too in a situation where they had a harsh parent. Let's say, and I know that this is true for some people because I hear people talk about this all the time. Let's say we grew up in a family where your mom or another female relative was constantly criticizing your appearance, right? Saying, are you sure you're going to wear that? Or making comments about your body or any other inappropriate thing. If we look at that person with compassion, right? A person that we know loves us, hopefully, right? That person thinks she is trying to help us. Now, that person has their own issues. That person is still being inappropriate. That person is also perhaps continuing to express ideas and thoughts that are not helpful and they're not welcome. That's a whole separate issue. But if we can look at that person and think, they're doing the best that they can, they are trying to help me, we can at least get out of our anger and our reactivity and see that this misguided approach, this yelling, this criticizing, this harshness is intentioned to try and help. And we're going to choose to not allow that anymore. We're going to choose to say that this is not the way that we accomplish things anymore. So really trying to understand what that part of you is trying to do so that you can have compassion for that part of yourself. And then the third thing that we do is we start to move that part of us to the back seat. So she's a part of us. She's a part of us that has helped us, most likely, to do some things. It's just we are in a place where we are moving out of that. We are moving to a place where we no longer believe that being harsh and mean to ourselves is the only way that we can be successful, productive human beings, because it is harming us. So, what would life be like, right, if we move her to the back seat? Now, we've empathized with her. We understand that she thinks she's doing us good. We know that we can't kick her out because she's a part of us. It doesn't actually work to pretend like those parts of us don't exist. Their voices will continue to show up. But if we can recognize when it's happening, if we can recognize, oh, that's a judge thought. That's a judge thought. There's my judge again, thinking that I can't just enjoy a run, that I ought to be training for a marathon when I don't have the time or the energy or the desire to run a marathon. Okay, well, that part of me believes that I can't just do something for the enjoyment of it. That part of me thinks that there needs to be an achievement attached to it. That's okay. That part has believed that for a really long time. It's okay. When we start to separate ourselves from that part a little bit, when we start to look at it from that lens, again, we don't feel like we are the victim of that part of ourselves. And we can start to see a path where we can make different choices, where we can have different thoughts that lead us to the things that we want to be doing or the things that we don't want to be doing, right? There are things that we are going to give up doing and stop judging ourselves for. I was listening back to an old call in my coaching group, and someone was talking about feeling mom guilt for wanting to be the person who, drives her son to all of his after school activities. She's a single mom, and feeling really guilty because she was just thinking, right, about hiring an after school nanny to be able to coordinate some of the after school activities and to drive her son around. And there was a small part of her that was afraid for safety, right? Because, of course, having someone else drive your children is something that can be quite terrifying for a lot of people. But more so, she was really holding on to this sense of feeling guilty because she works so much for not being the one to actually drive him. And of course, we see this sort of idea, right, pop up all over. But when you think about it, what she really wants, right, is she really wants quality time. And let's be honest, driving our kids around from one practice to another and then, I don't know, sitting in the car and waiting for them to be done, that's not really quality time. It might be something that somebody really wants to do, right? But if she's being honest with herself, she doesn't actually want that. She would rather that she can do some other activities, whether they be work related or not, and then be able to be present with her son when they are both not occupied doing other things, right? But we have to see that part of us, right? That judge that is a part of the conversation leading to her feeling guilty, wants her to believe that she needs to be doing all of the things because she already works so much over here. We get very wrapped up in these beliefs. And again, we could choose to hold on to them if we want. But if they are net negative in our lives, don't we want to believe that we could make different choices? I think most of us do. And because we're so enmeshed with this critic part of ourselves and believing the words that this critic part of us is saying, we get stuck, right? We get stuck in the belief that that part of us is right. When, that part of us is just expressing an opinion, quite frankly. The same way that relative might also express their opinion, and it may be incredibly unwelcome, judgmental, inappropriate, right? So we want to give ourselves a little space from that inner critic. We want to empathize with them and know that if we are being generous in our assumptions, we know that that inner critic believes that they are helping us, but we also know that it is not helpful and that it is not necessary and that it is harming us. And so we are going to decrease the volume on that inner critic. We are going to put that inner critic in the back seat. We know we can't make that voice fully go away, but we can downregulate our response to it. Instead of saying, oh, gosh, you're right, we can say, thanks for your opinion, Judge. I'm not gonna take your advice today. I know this sounds a little woo, and it sounds a little bit impossible if you've lived with your inner critic for such a long time. But this is the way that our brains work. And being able to understand this part of ourselves, being able to make choices about how much credence we want to give these parts, being able to decide, how do I want to be operating? How do I want to be thinking about the challenges that I face? How do I want to be thinking about leisure time and relaxation and time with my family and my friends? How about time for ourselves, right? We are going to need to decrease the inner critic voice. Because if we don't, that inner critic is constantly going to be judging us anytime we are doing something not work related or not quote unquote productive. See this as, a system that felt like it worked for you. And maybe it did work for you. But again, we want to make a different choice because we want to think and feel differently moving forward. What would it be like to live your life with this inner critic in the backseat? They're with us because, again, we can't separate them out, but they're not deciding where we're going. They're not picking the radio station, back when we had radio stations in our cars, right? They are not determining the course that we're taking. Do you still think that you could get to a destination that you want to go to with that inner critic in the back seat? I know I like to believe that I can. I like to believe that I could be incredibly successful, that I can relax, that I can do things that I enjoy, knowing that my inner critic always thinks I could be more efficient, more effective, more productive. That's okay. That part of me goes back a long time. But I also know that I need to decrease the volume on that part so that I can get the rest and relaxation and time with friends and family that I need and deserve. And I bet you want to join me on that. All right, my friends, that is what I have for you today. Thank you, as always, for listening. I'm going to put out one more call that if you have been thinking about joining us in Unbound, Women Physicians Reclaiming Their Lives, this is your last chance until the next round, which won't be until March 2025. So if you're listening to this episode in real time, you have until December 10th to enroll. We are going to be sorry, not December 10th. I got to look at the calendar. Let's see. It is, December 13th. There we go. So you have until December 13th to make your final decision. I invite you to join us. If you are a woman physician who is experiencing struggles with burnout, perfectionism, people-pleasing, lack of boundaries, come join us. Come do this work in community. This is the way that we start to feel better, and your opportunity is now. All right, my friends, until next time, take care.